The rumble of the armored vehicle faded as the squad stepped onto the cracked pavement of Mostar, the air thick with the acrid scent of smoke and gunpowder. The city was a skeleton of its former self. Crumbling buildings, shattered windows, and the distant echo of artillery fire. Captain Vukovic adjusted his helmet, his sharp gaze sweeping over the desolation before turning to his men. "This is it," he said, voice low but firm. "Keep your heads down and your eyes open." Private Marko Dragovich, the youngest of the group, swallowed hard as he took in the devastation. He had trained for this, but no amount of drills could prepare him for the reality of war. The weight of his rifle felt foreign in his hands. Sergeant Ivan Kovac, a grizzled veteran with a permanent scowl, clapped Marko on the shoulder. "First time in a war zone, kid." Marko nodded, his throat dry. Kovac smirked. "Don't worry. You'll either get used to it or you won't. Either way, you'll know soon enough." The squad moved cautiously through the debris-strewn streets, their boots crunching over broken glass and scattered bricks. The once vibrant city was now a maze of destruction, its beauty swallowed by the brutality of siege. Captain Vukovic halted them near the Neretva River, where the iconic starry most, the old bridge, stood defiantly against the backdrop of war. Its ancient stone arches spanned the emerald waters, a fragile thread connecting the divided city. "Listen up," Vukovic said, turning to face his men. "This bridge isn't just a crossing, it's a symbol. Both sides want it. For control, for morale, for history. Our job is to hold it, no matter what." Marko glanced at the bridge, its weathered stones whispering of centuries past. "How long?" he asked. Vukovic's jaw tightened. "As long as it takes." A distant explosion rattled the ground, sending a flock of startled birds into the ashen sky. The captain's expression darkened. "Get into position. We're not losing this bridge on my watch." As the men dispersed, Marko took one last look at the starry most, its silhouette stark against the burning horizon. He didn't know if they could hold it, but he knew they had to try. The siege had only just begun. Nightfall draped Mostar in an eerie silence, broken only by the occasional crackle of distant gunfire. The squad had taken their positions along the riverbank, their rifles resting against the crumbling stone barriers that lined the Neretva. The air was damp, carrying the faint metallic tang of the water below. Marko Dragovich shifted his weight, trying to ignore the stiffness settling into his legs. He had drawn first watch alongside Kovac, who leaned against the barrier with the ease of a man who had spent half his life in trenches. The older soldier lit a cigarette, the ember flaring briefly in the dark before he exhaled a slow stream of smoke. "You ever been to Mostar before?" Kovac asked, his voice a low rumble. Marko shook his head. "No, only in pictures. It was beautiful." Kovac snorted. "Yeah, was." He flicked ash into the dirt. "War takes everything, even the pretty things." A gust of wind rippled the river's surface, distorting the reflection of the moon. Marko tightened his grip on his rifle, scanning the opposite bank. Shadows stretched long and jagged across the ruins, playing tricks on his eyes. Then, voices. Faint, almost imperceptible, they rose from the water's edge like whispers carried on the current. Marko stiffened, straining to listen. "You hear that?" he muttered. Kovac took another drag. "Hear what?" Marko hesitated. The voices were gone now, swallowed by the night. Maybe it had just been the wind, or his own exhaustion playing tricks on him. "Nothing," he said finally. "Just thought I heard something." Kovac smirked. "Kid, if you start hearing things every time the wind blows, you're gonna have a long war." Marko forced a weak chuckle, but unease prickled at the back of his neck. He glanced down at the river. The water was still black as ink. But for a moment, he could have sworn something had moved beneath the surface. The scream came without warning, a sharp, ragged sound that tore through the night like a knife. Marco's heart lurched, his rifle snapping up instinctively as he spun toward the noise. What the hell was that? He hissed, eyes darting across the darkness. Kovac dropped his cigarette, crushing it under his boot as he straightened. Sounded like it came from the west bank. Before Marco could respond, boots pounded against the pavement as the rest of the squad scrambled toward them. Captain Vukovic arrived first, his expression taut. Report. No, We heard a scream, sir, Marco said, his pulse still hammering, just now. From across the river. Vukovic's gaze flicked toward the opposite bank, where the skeletal remains of buildings loomed like specters. It could be civilians, or a trap. He motioned sharply to the others. Fan out. Stay sharp. The squad moved cautiously along the river's edge, rifles raised, their breaths shallow in the cold air. Marco's fingers trembled against the trigger guard. Every shadow seemed to writhe, every whisper of wind a hissed threat. Then nothing. The scream didn't come again. The ruin stood silent, indifferent. Corporal Markovic, a wiry man with a perpetual sneer, lowered his weapon. Probably just the wind, or some stray cat. Marco shook his head. No, that was a person. I know it. Da. Markovic scoffed. Kid, you've been jumpy since we got here. It's war. People scream. But right now there's no one out there. Vukovic held up a hand, silencing them. He studied the river, the bridge, the ruins, his face unreadable. Finally, he exhaled. Markovic's right. No signs of movement. We'll keep watch, but until we have confirmation, we don't waste ammo on ghosts. Marco opened his mouth to protest, but Kovac caught his eye and gave a slight shake of his head. The message was clear. Let it go. As the squad returned to their posts, Marco lingered, staring at the water. The scream had been real. He was sure of it. And beneath the surface of the Neretva, something dark and unseen drifted just out of sight. The morning sun did little to warm the air as Captain Vukovic stood near the bridge, his gloved hands gripping the edges of a worn map. The squad had been split into pairs for a routine sweep of the surrounding ruins, standard procedure to ensure no enemy forces had infiltrated during the night. But two men hadn't returned. Private Luka Petrov and Corporal Dragan Illich had been assigned to clear the sector just east of the bridge, a maze of half-collapsed buildings and narrow alleys. Their last radio transmission had been clipped. Frantic, then silence. Vukovic's jaw tightened as he lowered the map. No contact in over an hour, he muttered. Marko Dragic shifted uneasily beside Sergeant Kovac. Could their radios have malfunctioned? Kovac exhaled sharply through his nose. Nose. Both of them? At the same time? Not likely. A cold knot formed in Marco's stomach. The squad had already lost men before to snipers, to mines, but disappearances were different. There was no body, no closure, just the gnawing question of what happened. Vukovic turned to the remaining soldiers, his voice low but carrying the weight of command. We're going after them. Full gear, no unnecessary risks. The squad moved out, rifles at the ready, boots crunching over broken stone. The ruins loomed ahead, their hollow windows like vacant eyes watching their approach. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the occasional skitter of debris underfoot. Marco's pulse thrummed in his ears as they entered the sector where Petrov and Illich had last been seen. The buildings here were gutted, their interiors exposed to the elements. Graffiti, some old, some fresh, marked the walls in jagged, angry strokes. Then, a flicker of movement. Marco's breath hitched. "Did you see that?" he whispered, nudging Kovac. The sergeant's grip tightened on his rifle. "Where?" "Diamond. Second floor. That building on the left." Kovac squinted, then shook his head. "Nothing. You sure?" Marco hesitated. The shadow had been there just for a second, but now the window was empty. Maybe. Vukovic signaled for them to halt. Ahead, a radio lay abandoned in the middle of the street, its antenna bent, the casing cracked. Corporal Illich. "Yeah, Nachin." Markovic crouched beside it, turning it over in his hands. No blood. No signs of a struggle. "Then where the hell are they?" Kovac growled. A gust of wind whistled through the ruins, carrying with it a sound that made Marco's skin crawl, a whisper, faint but unmistakable. "Help us." "Yeah." He whipped around. "You heard that, right?" The others stared at him. Vukovic's gaze hardened. Dragic, focus. Marco swallowed hard. The voice had been real. He was sure of it. But the others hadn't heard it, just like the scream the night before. Then, from the rubble-strewn alley to their right, a wet, choking gasp. The squad spun as one, rifles trained on the darkness between the buildings. A figure staggered into view, Petrov, his uniform torn, his face streaked with grime. His eyes were wide, unseeing. "Petrov." Marco lunged forward, but Kovac yanked him back. "Wait." Petrov took one more step before collapsing to his knees. His mouth moved, but no sound came out. Then, with a shudder, he toppled face first onto the pavement. Vukovic was the first to reach him, rolling him onto his back. The squad recoiled. Petrov's throat had been slit clean, precise. But his eyes were gone. Only hollow sockets remained, as if something had scooped them out. Marco's stomach turned. "Where's Illich?" No one answered. The ruins stood silent, the wind carrying the scent of iron and something older, fouler. Vukovic stood slowly, his face grim, were pulling back. Now. As they retreated, Marco couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching them from the shadows. Something that wasn't human. The squad had barely returned to their makeshift camp near the bridge when the first reports crackled over the radio movement on the starry most. Marco Dragic's fingers clenched around his rifle as he scanned the ancient stone arches. The moon hung low in the sky, casting long, wavering shadows across the bridge's weathered surface. The Neretva below churned dark and restless, its waters whispering secrets Marco couldn't decipher. Then he saw them. Figures black as pitch, their limbs too long, too fluid, crept along the bridge's arches like spiders. They moved in eerie silence, their forms flickering at the edges of his vision, as if not entirely solid. Marco's breath caught in his throat. "Captain." "Miand." Vukovic turned, following his gaze, his face hardened. "Dragic. Light them up." Marco didn't hesitate. He raised his rifle and fired a single shot into the air. The crack of gunfire shattered the night, echoing off the ruins. The figures froze. For a heartbeat, nothing moved. Then, as one, they twisted toward the sound, their faces featureless voids, their bodies bending at impossible angles. Marco's blood turned to ice. And just like that, they were gone. Vanished into the night, as if they had never been there at all. Kovac exhaled sharply beside him. What the hell was that? Marco's hands shook. He couldn't tear his eyes away from the bridge. I don't know. But they weren't human. Vukovic's voice was low, grim. No, they weren't. The wind howled through the ruins, carrying with it the faintest echo of laughter, mocking, inhuman. The bridge was no longer just a battleground. It was something else entirely. Captain Vukovic's command cut through the tension like a blade, full sweep. Now, the squad moved as one, fanning out across the bridge with rifles raised, their boots scuffing against centuries-old stone. The moonlight painted everything in silver and shadow, turning the familiar arches into something alien. Marco kept his back close to Kovacs, his pulse hammering as he scanned the darkness. Nothing, Markovic muttered after a tense minute. No footprints, no shell casings, not even a damn scratch on the stone. Kovacs spat over the edge of the bridge, watching the spittle vanish into the Neretva below. Figures don't just disappear. They go somewhere. Marco's grip on his rifle tightened. He could still see them in his mind, those elongated limbs, the way they'd folded into the dark. What if they weren't really there? Markovic scoffed. You saying we all hallucinated the same thing? I'm saying something was on this bridge, Marco shot back. And I don't think bullets would have stopped it. A hush fell over the group. The wind hissed through the gaps in the stone, carrying the scent of damp earth and something faintly metallic. Vukovic exhaled sharply, rubbing the bridge of his nose. We're missing something. Petrov and Illich vanished without a trace. And now this. He looked up, his eyes locking onto the bridge's central arch. This city's been standing for centuries. Wars, sieges, empires rising and falling, and this damn bridge stays. Kovac frowned. You think it's what? Cursed? Pay. I think we don't know what we're dealing with, Vukovic said flatly. He turned to the men, his voice dropping. Double the watch. No one crosses this bridge alone. And if you see anything. A sudden splash from the river below cut him off. Every head snapped toward the sound. The water rippled violently, as if something large had plunged beneath the surface. Then silence. Marco's breath fogged in the cold air. That wasn't the wind. For a long moment, no one moved. Then, slowly, Vukovic stepped to the edge, peering down into the inky water. The reflection of the moon wavered, distorted. Back to camp, he said quietly. Now. As the squad retreated, Marco couldn't shake the feeling of eyes on his back. He glanced over his shoulder once, just in time to see a shadow detach itself from the bridge's archway, a silhouette too tall, too wrong before it melted into the night. The men didn't speak as they returned to their posts, but their exchanged glances said enough. Whatever was happening in Mostar, it was no longer just a war between men, and the bridge was watching. The morning sun did little to dispel the unease that clung to the squad like a second skin. Marko Dragic sat on an overturned crate near their makeshift camp, cleaning his rifle with mechanical precision. The memory of the figures on the bridge, the way they had moved, the way they had vanished, played over and over in his mind. A rustling in the rubble made him tense, his fingers tightening around the weapon. But it wasn't an enemy soldier or one of those shadowed figures. Instead, an old man emerged from the ruins, his face lined with deep wrinkles, his clothes worn but clean. He carried a cloth sack over one shoulder, his steps slow but deliberate. Marco relaxed slightly, but kept his rifle close. Halt, he called out in halting Bosnian. Identify yourself. The man stopped, raising his hands in a gesture of peace. His eyes, sharp despite his age, flicked from Marco to the other soldiers nearby. I mean, no trouble, he said in accented but clear Serbian. I am only bringing food. For you. Kovac, who had been sharpening his knife nearby, looked up with a skeptical frown. Why? The old man's lips pressed into a thin line. Because you are here. And because you do not know what you guard. Vukovic approached, his gaze assessing. You're from the city? The man nodded. All my life. Before the war, I was a teacher. Now, I am just a man who remembers. He lowered his hands slowly and set the sack on the ground, revealing loaves of bread and a few withered apples. You should not be on the bridge at night. Marco exchanged a glance with Kovac. The sergeant's scowl deepened. We've got orders to hold it, night or day. The old man shook his head. The bridge is not for the living anymore. His voice dropped, his eyes darting toward the river. The Neretva has taken many, not just in this war. For centuries, men have thrown their enemies into its waters. Their spirits do not rest. A cold prickle ran down Marco's spine. Vukovic crossed his arms. You're saying the bridge is haunted? The old man didn't flinch. I am saying there are things here you do not understand. The ones you saw last night, they are not soldiers. They are golubari. Marco frowned. Pigeon keepers? The old man's smile was grim. No. The word is older. It means the ones who take. He pointed to the river. They drag the drowned back into the depths. And they are hungry. Kovac barked a laugh. Ghost stories. That's what you came here to tell us. The old man's gaze didn't waver. Where are your missing men? Silence. Ness. Marco's throat tightened. He thought of Petrov's hollow eyes, of the scream in the night, of the shadows that moved wrong. Vukovic's voice was quiet. You've seen these things before. The old man nodded. When I was a boy, my grandfather told me stories. He said the bridge was built on blood, that the river remembers. He bent slowly, picking up his now empty sack. Leave the bridge at night. Or do not cross it at all. Kovac rolled his eyes. Right. We'll just tell command the ghost said we can't hold our position. The old man turned to go, then paused. You do not have to believe me, but you have seen them, and they have seen you. Din. With that, he shuffled back into the ruins, leaving the squad in uneasy silence. Marco stared at the bread, his appetite gone. Captain, what if he's right? Vukovic's jaw worked. Orders stand. We hold the bridge. But his eyes flicked toward the Neretva, its dark waters swirling endlessly below. Kovac snorted, grabbing an apple and taking a loud bite. Kid, if you're scared of ghost stories, wait till you meet the enemy snipers. But as Marco looked at the bridge, its ancient stones gleaming in the sunlight, he couldn't shake the feeling that something watched them back. And it was only a matter of time before it showed itself again. The fog rolled in at dusk thick, suffocating, swallowing the ruins whole. One moment, the Neretva was visible, its dark waters glinting under the fading light. The next, the world beyond arm's length vanished into swirling gray. Marco Dragic tightened his grip on his rifle, the cold moisture clinging to his skin like a second uniform. Beside him, Sergeant Petrovic, a bear of a man with a permanent 5 o'clock shadow, muttered a curse under his breath. Can't see a damn thing, Petrovic grumbled, squinting into the haze. Perfect night for an ambush. Marco didn't answer. His ears strained against the silence, every nerve alight. The fog played tricks, muffling sound, distorting distance. A footstep could be inches away or miles. Then sobbing. Faint, broken. The sound drifted from the riverbank like a half-remembered dream. Marco's breath hitched. You hear that? Petrovic went rigid. His hand twitched toward his sidearm. Yeah. The crying was unmistakable now, a child's voice, raw with terror. It came from the water's edge, just beyond the veil of fog. Petrovic took a step forward, his boots crunching on gravel. "Hello?" he called, his voice uncharacteristically gentle. "Who's there?" Meh. No answer. Just the soft, hiccuping sobs. Marco's pulse thundered in his ears. "We should get the captain." Petrovic shook his head, already moving toward the sound. "Kid sounds hurt. We can't wait." Marco hesitated, then followed, his rifle raised. The fog parted reluctantly before them, closing in their wake as if alive. The sobs grew louder, more desperate. Then Petrovic froze. Marco nearly collided with him. "What?" Petrovic's voice was a whisper. "There." Through the mist, a silhouette small, hunched, perched on the very edge of the riverbank. A child, their back turned, shoulders shaking with silent tears. Marco's throat tightened. "Hey," he called softly. "It's okay. We're here to help." The figure didn't move. Petrovic took another step, his hand outstretched. "Come away from the water. It's not safe." The sobbing stopped. The child's head tilted too far, too slow until it was turned fully backward, the spine twisting at an impossible angle. Marco's blood turned to ice. The face that stared back at them was not a child's. Empty sockets gaped where eyes should have been. The mouth stretched too wide, lips peeling back over needle-thin teeth. A wet, rattling laugh bubbled up from its throat. Petrovic swore, stumbling back. "What the fuck?" The thing lunged. Marco fired on instinct. The gunshot tore through the fog, the recoil jarring his shoulder. The figure jerked but didn't fall. It scuttled sideways like a crab, limbs bending all wrong, before vanishing into the river with a splash. Silence. Tamed. Petrovic's breath came in ragged gasps. Did you see that?" Marco's hand shook so badly he nearly dropped his rifle. "We need to go. Now." They ran, boots slipping on damp stone, the fog swallowing their retreat. Behind them, the river churned not with the thing's departure, but with something rising. Something much, much larger. By the time they reached camp, the fog had thickened to a solid wall. The squad's shouts were muffled, distant. Vukovic emerged from the haze, his face grim. "Report." "Yen." Petrovic's voice cracked. There was it looked like a kid, but... Marco cut in, his voice steadier than he felt. "Something's in the river, Captain. And it's not human." Vukovic's gaze flicked toward the unseen water, his jaw tight. Then, quietly, barricade the camp. No one goes near the bank tonight. As the men scrambled to obey, Marco stared into the fog. Somewhere in that endless gray, something stared back. The squad spent the rest of the night in tense silence, their rifles trained on the fog-shrouded riverbank. Dawn came reluctantly, the sun struggling to pierce the thick mist that clung to Mostar like a burial shroud. Marco Dragic rubbed his eyes, exhaustion weighing on him like a physical force. He hadn't slept, none of them had. Not after what he and Petrovic had seen. The memory of that twisted face, those hollow eyes, sent a fresh shiver down his spine. Captain Vukovic ordered a sweep of the riverbank at first light. The fog had thinned enough to see a few meters ahead, but the Neretva's waters remained dark and impenetrable. Marco moved cautiously, his boots sinking slightly into the damp earth near the water's edge. The river had swelled overnight, its currents churning with unseen force. Something caught his eye, a flash of pale fabric tangled in the reeds. He knelt, reaching for it. His fingers closed around a waterlogged, leather-bound book, its pages swollen and warped. The cover was cracked, the ink inside smeared, but some of the writing was still legible. "Captain," Marco called, holding it up, "found something." Vukovic and Kovac approached, their expressions grim. The captain took the book, carefully peeling apart the soggy pages. "It's a diary," Vukovic muttered, squinting at the faded script. "Belonged to someone named Emile." Kovac leaned in. "Anything useful?" Vukovic skimmed the entries, his frown deepening. Most were mundane notes about rations, patrols, the monotony of war. But the final entry made his breath hitch. "They're coming for me. The others think I'm mad, but I saw what they did to Jovan. His eyes, God, his eyes. I tried to warn the lieutenant, but he just laughed, called me shell-shocked. But I know what I saw. The soldiers on the bridge last night, they weren't ours. They weren't even human. Their faces were wrong, their bodies bent like reeds in the wind. I'm leaving. I won't wait for them to come for me too. If I can just make it to the other side. They're here. They're right outside. I can hear them whispering. Oh God, they know I wrote this. They know I. No, I won't let them take me. I'll jump before I let those things. If anyone finds this, don't trust the shadows. Don't trust the water. And for the love of God, don't let them push you off the... The entry ended abruptly, the last sentence trailing into a jagged smear, as if the writer had been interrupted mid-sentence. A heavy silence settled over the group. Marco swallowed hard. He was pushed off the bridge. Kovac's jaw tightened, or he jumped. Vukovic snapped the diary shut, his knuckles white around the cover. Either way, he's dead. And whatever he saw out there, we've seen it too. Marco's gaze drifted back to the river. The water lapped hungrily at the bank, as if waiting for its next offering. The old man's warning echoed in his mind, the ones who take. Emile, and now they had a name. Golubari. The squad stood at the water's edge, the diary a damning testament in Vukovic's hands. The bridge loomed behind them, its stones whispering of centuries of bloodshed. Marco knew one thing for certain. They weren't just fighting a war anymore. They were prey. The campfire flickered weakly against the encroaching darkness, casting jagged shadows across the faces of the assembled squad. No one had spoken for what felt like hours, not since Vukovic had read the final, frantic words of Emile's journal. The diary now lay on the ground between them, its warped pages half open like a gutted animal. Marco Dragic stared into the flames, his mind replaying the hollow-eyed thing he and Petrovic had seen by the river. The creature's laughter still echoed in his skull, wet and guttural. Then, from the edge of the firelight, Corporal Markovic cleared his throat. His fingers drummed an uneven rhythm against his knee. "I saw them too," he said abruptly, his voice low. The squad turned as one. Kovac's brow furrowed. Saw what? Markovic didn't meet their eyes. His gaze was fixed on the bridge, its arches barely visible in the gloom. The figures. On the bridge. The night before last. He swallowed. I didn't say anything because I thought I was losing it. A beat of silence. Marco leaned forward. What did you see? Markovic's jaw worked. They were wrong. Too tall. Too thin, like someone stretched them out. His fingers mimicked the motion, pulling at the air, and their faces he broke off, shaking his head. Vukovic's voice was steady. Describe it. Markovic exhaled sharply. No eyes, just black. And their mouths, they smiled the whole time. His hands clenched into fists. They were watching us. Not just watching. Like they knew exactly what they were going to do to us. A cold weight settled in Marco's chest. He had seen it too, that predatory stillness, the way the figures had tilted their heads as if savoring their fear. Petrovic shifted uncomfortably. So what the hell are they? Enemy infiltrators in some kind of, I don't know, fucked up camouflage? Markovic barked a humorless laugh. You think the Croats are fielding ghosts now? I think we're all losing it, Kovac muttered, rubbing his temples. Sleep deprivation, stress, bad rations, hell. Maybe someone slipped something into the water. Marco shook his head. It's not in our heads. We've all seen it. Heard it. He gestured to the journal. And now we've got proof that someone else did too. Vukovic picked up the diary, thumbing its ruined pages. Emile's unit was stationed here before us. Same bridge. Same sightings. His gaze lifted, scanning the squad. Whatever's happening, it's not new. And it's not just us. A gust of wind sent the fire sputtering, plunging the camp into momentary darkness. When the light returned, Markovic's face was ashen. The old man called them golubari, he whispered, said they dragged the drowned back into the river. Kovac scoffed, but there was no force behind it. So what? We're supposed to believe in fairy tales now. Believe what you want, Markovic shot back. But Petrov and Illich vanished without a trace. Just like Emile's friend Jovan. And you really think that's a coincidence? Silence. Yeah. Marco's fingers twitched toward his rifle. The night felt heavier suddenly, the darkness beyond the fire pressing in like a living thing. Vukovic stood abruptly, tucking the journal into his vest. Enough. We're soldiers, not ghost hunters. Our orders are to hold this bridge, and that's what we'll do. His tone brooked no argument, but his eyes lingered on the Neretva, its waters glinting faintly in the moonlight. Double the watch. No one goes near the river alone. And if you see anything. A distant splash cut him off. Every head snapped toward the sound. The river's surface rippled violently, as if something had breached it, then stilled. Vukovic's hand hovered near his sidearm. Markovic. Dragic. With me. Marco stood, his pulse roaring in his ears. The three of them moved toward the riverbank, rifles raised. The Neretva lay black and silent, its depths impenetrable. Then Marco saw it. A handprint slick and glistening on one of the rocks near the water's edge. Too large to be human, the fingers elongated, the webbing between them stretched like a frog's. Markovic made a strangled noise in his throat. That wasn't there before. Vukovic's jaw tightened. No, he agreed quietly, it wasn't. Meh. Behind them, the fire crackled, its light too weak to reach the water. Something was out there. And it was getting closer. The handprint glistened under the moonlight, its unnatural shape unmistakable. Marco's breath fogged in the cold air as he stared at it, his stomach twisting. Not human. They. Captain Vukovic straightened, his face unreadable. Markovic, get the others. Full perimeter sweep. Now. Markovic hesitated, his eyes darting between the river and the captain. Sir, if there's something out there. That's an order. Vukovic's voice was steel. Markovic swallowed hard but nodded, turning on his heel and jogging back toward camp. The moment he was out of earshot, Vukovic turned to Marco, his expression grim. You saw what happened to Petrov and Illich. You heard the old man's warning. He glanced at the river, his jaw tightening. I need to know, do you believe this? Marco's throat was dry. I don't know what to believe, sir. But I know what I've seen. And it's not just the fog playing tricks. Vukovic exhaled sharply, his breath curling in the cold. If I report this, if I tell command we're abandoning the bridge because of ghosts. A rustling in the reeds cut him off. Both men spun, rifles raised. The riverbank was still, the water lapping gently against the rocks. But the reeds trembled, though there was no wind. Marco's finger hovered over the trigger. Did you hear that? You. Vukovic didn't answer. His gaze was locked on the water. A shadow moved beneath the surface, something long and sinuous, gliding just beneath the murk. Then, with a soft plink, a single drop of water landed on the rock beside the handprint. Then, another. Then, another. Marco's blood ran cold. The drops weren't falling from the sky. They were rising from the river. Vukovic grabbed his arm, yanking him back. Move. They retreated just as the squad arrived, weapons ready, their faces taut with tension. Kovac shouldered his way to the front, his eyes scanning the riverbank. What the hell's going on? Vukovic didn't answer. His grip on Marco's arm tightened briefly before he let go, turning to the others. New orders. No one approaches the water alone. No night patrols on the bridge. And if you see anything at all, you report it directly to me. Kovac's brows shot up. You're serious? Vukovic's gaze didn't waver. This isn't a debate, Sergeant. The squad exchanged uneasy glances. No one dared argue, but the unspoken question hung heavy in the air. What aren't you telling us? Markovic stepped forward, his voice low. Captain, if there's something out there, something not human, we deserve to know. Vukovic's jaw clenched. For a moment, Marco thought he might actually tell them the truth. Then, abruptly, the captain shook his head. Stick to the orders. That's all you need to know. The men didn't press further. They had seen enough: the missing patrol, the journal, the way the captain's hands had trembled just slightly when he pulled Marco back from the water. But fear, once planted, doesn't stay buried. As the squad dispersed, Marco lingered, staring at the river. The handprint was already fading, the water drying unnaturally fast, as if the river itself was erasing the evidence. Kovac sidled up beside him, lighting a cigarette with deliberate calm. You know, kid, he muttered, exhaling smoke, I've been in this war long enough to know when someone's hiding something. He glanced at Marco sidelong. You gonna tell me what really happened out here? Marco hesitated. Then, quietly, you wouldn't believe me. Kovac took a long drag, his eyes on the bridge. Try me. Me. But before Marco could answer, a sound cut through the night, soft, wet, unmistakable. Laughter. From the water. Ben. Kovac's cigarette froze halfway to his lips. His face drained of color. Marco didn't need to say anything else. The fear in Kovac's eyes said it all. The squad returned to camp in silence, but the unspoken truth coiled between them like a serpent. Captain Vukovic's orders were clear. But fear, once awakened, doesn't follow orders. And neither do the things in the river. Marco Dragic dreamed of drowning. Dark water filled his lungs, thick and cold, dragging him deeper into the Neretva's embrace. Shapes moved in the depths, elongated shadows with hollow eyes, their fingers brushing his ankles like reeds in the current. He tried to scream, but the river stole his voice, filling his mouth with silt and silence. Then, a whisper. You're already ours. Meh. Marco jolted awake with a gasp, his hands clawing at his throat. His uniform clung to him, damp with sweat, his heart hammering against his ribs. The camp was quiet, the pre-dawn light barely piercing the haze over the river. He exhaled shakily, running a hand through his hair. Just a dream. Just another goddamn. His boot squelched. But Marco froze. Slowly he looked down. His boots were soaked. Not just damp, fully submerged, water seeping through the laces, the leather darkened to near black. A small puddle had formed beneath him, the ground muddy where he'd been sitting. His breath hitched. He hadn't been near the river. He hadn't left his post. Named. But the water was real. Kovac stirred nearby, blinking blearily. Kid? You okay? Marco opened his mouth, then closed it. What could he say? That the river had reached for him in his sleep. That something had dragged him under without ever touching him. Kovac's gaze dropped to Marco's boots. His brow furrowed. The hell happened to you? Marco swallowed hard. I don't know. A lie. He did know. Did know. The nightmare hadn't been just a dream. And the golubari weren't just in the river anymore. The sun had barely risen when the shouting started. Marco Dragic jerked upright, his hand already reaching for his rifle. The camp was in chaos, men scrambling to their feet, voices overlapping in sharp, panic bursts. Captain Vukovic stood near the riverbank, his posture rigid, his face unreadable. Marco jogged over, his damp boots squelching with every step. Captain, what's happening? Vukovic didn't answer immediately. His gaze was fixed on something near the water's edge. Marco followed his line of sight and his blood turned to ice. Neatly stacked by the riverbank were 2 rifles, a pair of helmets, and a radio, all abandoned, all untouched. Marco's throat tightened. Whose gear is that? Second patrol. Vukovic said, his voice hollow. Jankovic and Nikolic. They were supposed to be watching the eastern approach. Kovac pushed through the gathered soldiers, his face dark. Where are they? Day. Vukovic's silence was answer enough. Marco stepped closer, his stomach churning. The rifles were clean, the helmets free of scratches or blood. Even the radio looked undamaged, its antenna straight. It was as if the men had simply taken everything off and walked away. Or been taken. Marco crouched, examining the ground. The dirt was damp from the river's mist, but there were no footprints leading to or from the stacked deer. No signs of a struggle. Just the eerie precision of it, all the rifles placed side by side, the helmets balanced atop them like macabre trophies. A murmur rippled through the squad. They wouldn't just leave, Markovic muttered. Not like this. Kovac spat into the dirt. Unless something made them. The unspoken word hung heavy in the air, golubari. Marco straightened, his eyes drifting to the river. The water was calm, its surface smooth as glass, but beneath it. Vukovic exhaled sharply. Search the area, full sweep. If they're out there, we find them. The squad moved out, their steps hesitant, their eyes darting between the ruins and the river. Marco stayed near Kovac, his rifle gripped so tightly his knuckles ached. You think they're still alive? Marco whispered. Kovac's jaw worked. No. They found no bodies. No blood. No trace of Jankovic or Nikolic beyond their abandoned gear. But as they combed the riverbank, Marco noticed something, a single, glistening handprint on a flat stone near the water. Just like the one from the night before. Only this time, it was smaller. Fresher. Marco recoiled. Captain. Vukovic was already there, his face grim. He didn't need to say it. They all knew. Whatever had taken Petrov and Illich had come back. And it wasn't done yet. As the squad regrouped, the silence between them was thicker than the fog. The river lapped gently at the bank, its whispers just out of reach. Marco stared at the stacked rifles, the helmets, the radio. A message. Message. A warning. Moss, you're next. The night air was thick with the scent of damp earth and rusted metal. Marco Dragic sat on a broken crate near the camp's perimeter, his rifle resting across his knees. The squad had barely spoken since the discovery of the second patrol's abandoned gear. The weight of their missing comrades Petrov, Illich, Dragovich, Nikolic hung over them like a shroud. Marco rubbed his temples, exhaustion gnawing at the edges of his vision. He hadn't slept properly in days, not since the nightmares had started. Not since the river had reached for him in his dreams. Then, a whisper. Marco. Bay. His breath hitched. The voice was soft, barely audible, but unmistakable. It came from the darkness beyond the firelight, a sound that slithered into his ears like water trickling through cracks. Marco's grip tightened on his rifle. Who's there? Silence. Men. Then again, Marco. This time it wasn't alone. Another voice joined it, whispering a different name. Then another. The night air hummed with them, a chorus of hushed, insistent calls, each one threading through the camp like a cold finger down the spine. Across the fire, Kovac's head snapped up. His eyes locked onto Marco's. You hear that? Marco nodded, his throat dry. Kovac stood slowly, his rifle raised. That's my name. Dan. The whispers grew louder, overlapping, twisting together. Some were pleading. Some were laughing. All of them were wrong, too wet, too guttural, as if spoken through mouths filled with river water. Private Milos, the youngest after Marco, clapped his hands over his ears. Make it stop, make it stop. Captain Vukovic emerged from his tent, his face drawn. What the hell is going on? Marco swallowed hard. They're calling us, sir. All of us. Mir. Vukovic's gaze swept the darkness beyond the fire. His jaw clenched. Eyes sharp. Weapons ready. The squad formed a loose circle, their backs to the fire, rifles trained on the shifting shadows. The whispers didn't stop. If anything, they grew more urgent, more hungry. Come closer. D. We're waiting. Join us. Yay. Markovic's hands shook around his rifle. This isn't possible. This isn't. A splash from the river cut him off. Every head turned. The Neretva's surface rippled violently, as if something massive had just submerged. Then, slowly, figures emerged from the water. Not walking. Not swimming. Rising. Their limbs were too long, their bodies emaciated, skin stretched taut over bones like wet parchment. Their faces were smooth, featureless, no eyes, no noses, just gaping, lipless mouths that stretched into grotesque smiles as they whispered the soldiers' names. Kovac cursed, firing a shot into the dark. The bullet tore through one of the figures, but it didn't flinch. Didn't bleed. It just kept coming, its mouth widening further, the whisper turning into a wet, rattling laugh. Marco's breath came in short, panic gasps. This wasn't an ambush. This wasn't the enemy. This was something older. Something that had been waiting. Vukovic's voice cut through the chaos. Fall back. To the bridge. The squad didn't need to be told twice. They ran, boots pounding against the cracked pavement, the whispers chasing them like a tide. Marco risked a glance over his shoulder. The figures weren't running. They were flowing, their bodies elongating, stretching across the ground like shadows given form. The starry most loomed ahead, its ancient stones a fragile sanctuary. Marco's lungs burned as he sprinted onto the bridge, the others close behind. Then he skidded to a halt. At the center of the bridge, silhouetted against the moonlight, stood a figure. Not one of the river things. A man. His uniform was tattered, his face gaunt, his eyes hollow. Corporal Dragon Illich. Marco's blood turned to ice. Illich? The figure smiled too wide, too many teeth. You shouldn't have come back, it whispered. And then the river erupted behind them. The squad froze, caught between the horrors rising from the river and the specter of their dead comrades standing on the bridge. The whispers had stopped, replaced by a silence so thick it pressed against Marco's eardrums. Captain Vukovic was the first to move, stepping forward with his rifle half raised. Illich. His voice was steady, but Marco saw the tension in his shoulders. If that's really you. The figure tilted its head, the movement too sharp, too wrong. Its lips peeled back in a grin that split its face like a wound. Oh, Captain, it rasped, the voice a grotesque mimicry of Illich's. You know it's not. Me. Behind them, the water churned. The elongated figures had halted at the river's edge, their hollow faces turned toward the bridge, as if awaiting permission. Kovac swore under his breath, backing up until his shoulders bumped against Marco's. We're trapped. Me. Marco's pulse hammered in his throat. The bridge, the one place they'd thought might be safe, was now a dead end. Then, from the ruins to their left, a voice cut through the tension. You should listen to the dead, Captain. The squad spun as one, rifles snapping toward the sound. An old man stepped from the shadows, his hands raised in a gesture of peace. It was the same man who had brought them food days before the teacher. His face was grim, his eyes locked on the thing wearing Illich's skin. Vukovic didn't lower his weapon. You. The old man nodded. Me. And if you want to live, you'll lower your guns. They won't help you here. Marco's fingers twitched on the trigger. What will help? What? The old man's gaze flicked to the bridge, understanding. The thing that wasn't Illich laughed a wet, gurgling sound. He thinks stories will save them. The old man ignored it, turning to the squad. This bridge has stood for centuries. It has seen empires rise and fall. And it has fed the river more souls than you can count. His voice dropped, weighted with history, executions, suicides. The bodies thrown into the Neretva during wars long forgotten, the river remembers. And the golubari are its keepers. Marco's stomach twisted. They're taking us. One by one. By one. The old man nodded. They always do. This bridge is a threshold. A door. He gestured to the thing on the bridge. And they've already opened it. The not Illich figure spread its arms, its grin widening. Come, Captain. Don't you want to see what took your men? Don't you want to know? Vukovic's jaw clenched. What do you want? The figure's head lolled to the side, what we've always wanted. The drowned, the lost, the forgotten. Its voice twisted, layers of other voices bleeding into it. Petrov, Dragovich, Nikolic. Join us. Or run. Either way, the river will have you. The old man stepped forward, his voice urgent. There's a way to break the cycle. But you have to listen. Kovac barked a humorless laugh. Break it? How? The old man's eyes darkened. The bridge was built on blood. It must be sealed the same way. A beat of silence. Then the thing on the bridge moved. It lunged, its body stretching like taffy, fingers elongating into claws. The old man shouted a warning too late. The squad scattered as the thing slammed into their ranks, its form flickering between Illich and something far worse. Marco hit the ground hard, his rifle skidding away. He scrambled back, his breath coming in ragged gasps. The river erupted. The golubari surged forward, their whispers rising to a deafening chorus. The bridge was no longer a sanctuary. It was a hunting ground. And the squad was out of time. The night was unnaturally still, the air thick with the scent of damp stone and something older, something rotting beneath the river's surface. Captain Vukovic stood alone on the bridge, his rifle slung across his back, his gloved hands braced against the weathered stone railing. He had dismissed the others. No arguments, no debate. If something was coming for them, he would meet it first. The Neretva churned below, black and restless, its currents whispering secrets he couldn't decipher. The moon hung low, casting silver light across the bridge's arches, turning the ancient stone into something spectral. Then, movement. A figure stood at the far end of the bridge, silhouetted against the ruins. Vukovic's hand drifted toward his sidearm. The shape was too still, too wrong. It wore a tattered civilian coat, the fabric hanging loose like shed skin. The face was hidden in shadow, but the posture hunched. Unnatural sent a primal warning screaming through Vukovic's nerves. He didn't call out. Didn't need to. The thing knew he was there. Slowly, it raised one arm, fingers uncurling like the legs of a spider. A wet, clicking sound echoed across the bridge, bone on bone, joint on joint. Vukovic drew his pistol. Identify yourself. The figure tilted its head. Then, with a shuddering, jerking motion, it took a step forward. The moonlight caught its face. Vukovic's breath locked in his chest. No eyes. No mouth. Just smooth, featureless skin stretched tight over a skull that was too long, too narrow. The thing took another step. Vukovic fired. The bullet tore through the figure's chest, the sound deafening in the silence. The thing staggered but didn't fall. It righted itself with a grotesque twitch, its head tilting as if amused. Then it spoke. Chi. Captain. Captain. The voice was a chorus, Petrov's rasp, Illich's growl, Jankovic's laugh, all twisted together into something wet and broken. Vukovic's finger tightened on the trigger. You're not them. Mem. The figure's shoulders shook not with pain, but with silent, mirthless laughter. Aren't we? It took another step. You left them to us. You let them drown. The words hit like a blade. The nightmares of his men's faces, their hands reaching for him as the river pulled them under. Vukovic fired again. And again. The figure jerked with each impact but kept coming, its tattered coat fluttering like wings. The distance between them shrank. 10 meters. 5. Then, from the river below, a splash. Vukovic risked a glance over the railing. The water was alive. Shapes writhed beneath the surface, their elongated limbs tangling in the current, their hollow faces turned upward. Waiting. Now, the figure on the bridge lunged. Vukovic sidestepped, but its fingers grazed his arm icy cold, the touch searing through his jacket like frostbite. He staggered back, his boot slipping on the damp stone. The thing smiled. Join us, Captain. A gunshot cracked through the night. The figure's head snapped sideways as the bullet tore through its temple. It reeled, hissing a sound like steam escaping a corpse. Vukovic turned. Marko Dragic stood at the bridge's entrance, rifle smoking, his face pale but determined. Behind him, the rest of the squad fanned out, weapons raised. Kovac's voice was a snarl. Did you really think we'd let you die alone, you stubborn bastard? The figure straightened, its ruined face knitting back together with a sickening squelch. Vukovic didn't smile, but for the first time in days he didn't feel the weight of the river pressing down on him either. Fall back, he ordered. Now. The squad retreated as one, their gunfire lighting up the night. The figure shrieked a sound that wasn't human, wasn't animal, just hunger given voice. Behind it, the river boiled. The golubari were coming. And this time, they weren't hiding. The figure turned, its face was featureless. Vukovic fired. The bullet passed through it. For a heartbeat, the night hung suspended. The gunshot echoed off the bridge's ancient stones, sharp and final. The figure didn't stagger, didn't bleed. It simply stood there, untouched, as if the bullet had never existed. Then it lunged. Its movement was liquid, a blur of tattered fabric and elongated limbs. Vukovic barely had time to raise his pistol before the thing was on him, its fingers too long, too cold, closing around his throat. Marco didn't hesitate. He fired again. The bullet tore through the figure's shoulder, but it barely flinched. Its grip tightened, lifting Vukovic off his feet. The captain's boots scraped against the stone as he clawed at the thing's wrists, his face darkening. Kovac roared, charging forward with his knife drawn. He slashed at the figure's back, the blade sinking in with a wet crunch. Black ichor oozed from the wound, but the thing didn't release its hold. Then, from the river below, a sound like 100 hands slapping the water at once. Marco risked a glance over the railing. The golubari were climbing. Their emaciated bodies slithered up the bridge's supports, their hollow faces turned upward, their mouths gaping in silent hunger. The water cascaded off them in thick, sludgy ropes, leaving trails of damp decay in their wake. We need to move, Markovic shouted, backing toward the far end of the bridge. Marco didn't retreat. He raised his rifle again, aiming for the figure's head. Let him go. Aye. The thing turned its featureless face toward him, and then impossibly it laughed. The sound was a wet, gurgling mockery of human mirth. Its grip on Vukovic didn't loosen. If anything, it tightened, the captain's breath coming in ragged, choked gasps. Kovac swore, yanking his knife free and stabbing again. This time, the blade found the thing's ribs. It shuddered but still didn't let go. Marco's finger hovered over the trigger. One more shot. But what good would it do? Then. A flicker of movement from the ruins. The old man, the teacher, sprinted onto the bridge, his arms laden with something dark and glistening. Get down, he bellowed. Marco barely had time to duck before the old man hurled the object, a cloth sack, dripping with thick, crimson liquid. It struck the figure square in the chest, bursting open in a spray of dark fluid. Lomukia, main was. Blood. And the effect was instantaneous. The figure shrieked, its body convulsing as the blood seared into its skin like acid. It dropped Vukovic, who collapsed to his knees, gasping. The thing staggered back, clawing at its chest, its form flickering human one moment, monstrous the next. The old man didn't pause. He grabbed Vukovic's arm, hauling him upright. The blood holds them back, but not for long. Marco didn't need to be told twice. He grabbed Kovac, dragging him away from the writhing figure. Fall back. Now. The squad retreated, their boots pounding against the bridge's worn stones. Behind them, the golubari hissed and wailed. Their advance slowed but not stopped. The blood sizzled where it touched them, their forms twisting in agony, but they kept coming. The old man led them off the bridge, into the skeletal remains of a bombed-out building. He shoved a rusted metal door closed behind them, barring it with a length of splintered wood. For a moment, there was only the sound of ragged breathing and the distant, hungry whispers of the things outside. Then Vukovic coughed, rubbing his throat. His voice was raw. What the hell was that? The old man's face was grim. A warning. The bridge is theirs now, and if you set foot on it again. A thunderous crash cut him off. The door shuddered in its frame. Marco's grip on his rifle tightened. They're breaking through. The old man didn't look surprised. They always do. Another impact. The wood splintered. Kovac spat, reloading his rifle with practiced ease. Then we fight. Vukovic stood, his jaw set. No, we run. Marco blinked. Run. The captain's eyes were hard. You heard the old man. The bridge is lost. Our mission is over. Another crash. The door bowed inward. The old man grabbed Marco's arm, his fingers like iron. There's another way out. Follow me and don't look back. As the door gave way behind them, the squad ran not toward the river, not toward the bridge, but into the heart of the ruined city, where the shadows were deep and the golubari, as whispers grew faint. But Marco knew one thing for certain. This wasn't over. Yeah, the river remembered. And it would always be hungry. The safe house was little more than a crumbling shell. Rotted floorboards, shattered windows, and the ever-present stench of damp concrete. The squad huddled inside, their faces hollow in the dim light of a single kerosene lamp. Outside, the whispers had faded, but no one dared believe they were truly gone. Marko Dragovich leaned against the wall, his damp boots leaving prints on the dust-covered floor. His hands wouldn't stop shaking. He kept seeing it, the figure's fingers around Vukovic's throat, the way its skin had sizzled under the blood, the sound it made when it laughed. Sergeant Petrovic broke the silence first. So? Ghosts? His voice was flat, stripped of its usual sarcasm. We're fighting ghosts now. Kovac didn't look up from cleaning his rifle. You saw what happened on that bridge. You tell me what else they could be. Markovich slammed his fist against the wall, making the lamp flicker. This is bullshit. We're soldiers, not exorcists. His voice cracked. I signed up to fight the enemy, not some fucking river demons. Vukovic stood by the window, his silhouette sharp against the pale moonlight. He hadn't spoken since they'd fled the bridge. Now, he turned slowly, his face unreadable. You want answers? His voice was quiet, but it cut through the room like a blade. Fine. Here's the truth. I don't know what we're facing. The admission hung in the air, heavier than the gunfire they'd grown used to. Marco's stomach twisted. The captain had always been their anchor, their certainty. Now even that was gone. Kovac exhaled sharply. That's it? That's all you've got? Vukovic's jaw tightened. You heard the old man. The bridge is a threshold. The golubari have been here longer than any of us, longer than this war. He rubbed his throat absently, where the thing's fingers had left darkening bruises. But we're not dying on that bridge, not like the others. Markovich let out a hysterical laugh. Oh, that's rich. So what's the plan, Captain? We just leave? Walk away from our post? His voice rose, edged with panic. Command will have us shot for desertion. Vukovic didn't flinch. Better a bullet than whatever's in that river. A beat of silence. Then, from the corner, Private Milos, the youngest, the quietest, spoke in a trembling whisper. They took Jankovic. They took Nikolic. They'll take all of us eventually. His fingers clutched at his dog tags like a rosary. We're already dead. The words settled over the group like a shroud. No one argued. Marco stared at his hands, still damp from the river's touch. He thought of the nightmare, the way the water had filled his lungs. The whispers calling his name. They were being hunted, and they had nowhere left to run. Vukovic straightened, his voice firm. We hold here until dawn. Then we move. Not toward the bridge, away from it. If command wants an explanation, they can come see the hellscape themselves. Kovac's laugh was bitter. And if those things follow us, Vukovic met his gaze, then we keep running. The lamp flickered, casting long, wavering shadows across the walls. Outside, the wind picked up, carrying with it the faintest echo of laughter. Wet, guttural, hung. Marco closed his eyes. The bridge was lost. And so, maybe, were they. The night pressed in around them, thick and suffocating. The squad had barely spoken since retreating to the safe house, each man lost in his own thoughts, his own fears. Marko Dragic sat near the shattered window, his rifle across his knees, his ears straining for any sound beyond the wind. Then, a scream, not a whisper this time, not a laugh. A full, blood-curdling shriek that tore through the silence like a blade. It came from the river, raw and ragged, the sound of a man drowning in pure terror. Marco was on his feet before the echo faded. The others were already moving, grabbing their weapons, their faces pale but determined. Vukovic didn't hesitate. Move! They sprinted toward the river, their boots pounding against the cracked pavement. The scream had come from the water. Marco was sure of it. The Neretva's dark surface glinted under the moonlight, its currents swirling like ink. They reached the bank just in time to see the last ripple fade. The river was still. No body, no thrashing limbs. Just the water, smooth and unbroken, as if nothing had disturbed it at all. Marco's breath fogged in the cold air. Where? Kovac crouched near the edge, his fingers brushing the damp stone. Footprints. Marco followed his gaze. A set of boot prints, fresh, deep, as if someone had been running, led right up to the water's edge. And then, nothing. No drag marks, no signs of a struggle, just the prints, stopping abruptly where the river began, as if the man had simply vanished into the depths. Markovich swore under his breath. Who was it? Vukovic's face was grim. Check the squad. They did. Every man accounted for. Which meant the scream hadn't come from one of theirs. Marco's skin prickled. Then who? A splash. The sound was small, almost insignificant. A pebble dropping into the water, but it made the squad freeze, their rifles snapping toward the sound. The river rippled. Then, slowly, something broke the surface. Pale, bloated, fingers curled like claws. It floated for a second, suspended in the current, before something beneath the water yanked it back under. Marco's stomach turned. He knew that hand. The watch on its wrist, the cracked face, the frayed leather band. Corporal Dragon Illich watched, the same one he'd been wearing the night he disappeared. The squad stood in stunned silence, their breaths shallow, their fingers tight around their triggers. The river was still again, its surface smooth as glass. No one spoke. No one needed to. The golubari had taken another, and they were just getting started. Dragovich exhaled sharply, his voice barely above a whisper. Fall back. Now. The squad didn't argue. They retreated from the water's edge, their steps quick but measured, their eyes never leaving the river. Marco was the last to turn away. As he did, he caught a glimpse of movement beneath the surface, a shadow, vast and shapeless, gliding just beneath the murk, and then it was gone. But the message was clear. The river was watching, and wasn't done with them yet. The pre-dawn light painted the ruins in shades of gray as Marco Dragovich paced the perimeter of their makeshift camp. His breath misted in the cold air, his fingers flexing restlessly against the stock of his rifle. The scream from the river still echoed in his skull, raw, human, abruptly silenced. Kovac sat on an overturned crate, sharpening his knife with methodical strokes. Kid, if you wear a hole in those boots, you're walking home barefoot. Marco didn't laugh. We should have checked the riverbank again. Maybe nothing. Kovac's blade scraped against the whetstone. You saw what happened to Illich's watch. Whatever's down there isn't giving him back. A rustle of fabric made them both turn. Sergeant Petrovic emerged from his tent, rubbing sleep from his eyes. Dragic, you're on watch. Relieve Dragovich. Marco frowned. He's not at the bridge. Petrovic blinked. He never came back? Cold dread coiled in Marco's gut. They found Dragovich's rifle on the bridge. It lay neatly placed against the stone railing, the barrel still warm, the strap unbroken. His helmet sat beside it, the chin strap dangling like a severed noose. No blood, no signs of struggle, just abandoned gear, still smelling of gun oil and sweat. Vukovic crouched beside the rifle, his gloved hand hovering over the barrel. Fired recently? Marco scanned the bridge, his pulse thundering. The Neretva below was calm, its surface unbroken. Where the hell is he? Kovac spat over the railing. Gone, same as the others. Marco's hands clenched. Dragovich had been on watch alone, a direct violation of orders. He wouldn't just leave his post. Vukovic stood, his face grim. No, he wouldn't. The wind picked up, carrying the scent of damp stone and something fouler. Like wet rot, like the river's breath. Marco's gaze drifted to the water. For a moment, just a moment, he thought he saw a shape beneath the surface. A pale hand, fingers splayed, sinking into the dark. Then it was gone. Vukovic's voice was steel. No more solo watches. No one steps foot on this bridge without backup. He picked up Dragovich's rifle, slinging it over his shoulder. And if you hear your name called, you ignore it. Marco swallowed hard. The golubari were getting bolder, and the squad was running out of men to lose. The squad fortified their position with grim efficiency, stacking sandbags, rigging tripwires, and positioning their remaining ammunition in easy reach. The air was thick with tension. Every scrape of boot against stone, every rustle of fabric sent eyes darting toward the river. Marco Dragovich wiped sweat from his brow, his fingers trembling as he tightened the last knot on a makeshift barricade. The sun had long since set, plunging Mostar into an oppressive darkness, broken only by the flickering glow of their lanterns. The Neretva's whispers had grown louder since Dragovich's disappearance, the water churning with unseen movement. Kovac crouched beside him, his rifle resting across his knees. His usual smirk was gone, replaced by a hollow-eyed stare. You feel it. Marco didn't need to ask what he meant. The weight of something watching, waiting, coiled just beyond the firelight. Yeah. Kovac spat into the dirt. We're being hunted. A sharp whistle cut through the night. Vukovic stood at the edge of their perimeter, motioning them over. The squad gathered in a tight circle, their faces drawn. Listen up, Vukovic said, his voice low. We're not waiting for dawn. We're moving out in 10. Markovic's head snapped up. Where? The bridge is the only way across the river. And it's a death sentence, Vukovic interrupted. His gaze swept over them, lingering on each man. We go south, through the ruins. There's an old sewer tunnel that runs under the city. If we can reach it, we can bypass the river entirely. Kovac's brow furrowed. Since when do you know Mostar's sewer system? Vukovic's jaw tightened. The old man told me. A beat of silence. The unspoken truth hung between them. The teacher had known more about the golubari than he'd let on. Marco swallowed hard. What if they follow us? Vukovic's hand drifted to the fresh bruises on his throat. Then we run faster. The squad dispersed, gathering their gear with quiet urgency. Marco checked his rifle for the third time, his fingers brushing the cold metal of his last remaining grenade. He didn't know if explosives would work against the things in the river, but the weight of it was a small comfort. Then, a splash. Not from the river. On the bridge, the squad froze. Weapons raised. The starry most loomed in the darkness, its arches silhouetted against the moonlit sky. At its center stood a figure. No, figures. Dozens of them. Their shapes flickered between human and something else. Long-headed limbs, hollow faces, mouths stretched too wide. They didn't move, didn't speak. They just watched. Marco's breath hitched. Captain. Vukovic didn't turn. His voice was a whisper. Don't look. Don't engage. We go now. The squad moved as one, backing away from the bridge, their boots scraping against the rubble. The figures didn't follow. But the whispers did. They slithered through the night, threading between the ruins, wrapping around the squad like a noose. Stay. Join us. You're already ours. Marco clenched his teeth, forcing himself to keep moving. The sewer tunnel was close, just beyond the skeletal remains of a bombed-out church. If they could reach it, if they could get underground, a scream tore through the night. Marco spun. Private Milos was gone. 1 second, he'd been at the rear of the group. The next, vanished. His rifle lay in the dirt, still warm. The squad didn't stop. They couldn't. The whispers rose to a crescendo, the river's surface boiling as shadows detached from the bridge, flowing toward them like ink spilled across stone. Vukovic's voice was raw. Run! The squad sprinted, their breaths ragged, their boots pounding against the broken pavement. The church loomed ahead, its shattered spire a jagged finger against the sky. Marco risked to glance over his shoulder. The figures weren't running. They were flowing, and they were gaining. The last stand had begun, and the river would take its due. Shadowy figures surrounded them. The soldiers fired. Their bullets did nothing. The creatures moved like liquid darkness, their elongated limbs twisting unnaturally as they closed in from all sides. Marco's rifle kicked against his shoulder, the muzzle flash illuminating hollow faces and gaping mouths. But the rounds passed straight through them, as if they were made of smoke. Kovac cursed, ejecting a spent magazine. They're not stopping. Vukovic barked an order. Grenades, now! Marco didn't hesitate. He yanked the pin from his last grenade and hurled it into the mass of shifting shadows. The explosion lit up the ruins, the concussive blast sending debris flying. But when the smoke cleared, the figures were still advancing, unharmed. Markovich's voice cracked. "What the hell are they?" The old man's warning echoed in Marco's mind. The ones who take the golubari weren't flesh and blood. They were something older, something hungrier, and they couldn't be killed. Dragovich grabbed Marco's arm, shoving him toward the crumbling church. "Go! We'll hold them off." Marco stumbled, then turned. "Captain!" But Vukovic was already moving, his pistol raised, firing into the encroaching tide. Kovac and the others fell into position beside him, their faces set in grim determination. They knew. This was the end. Marco's chest tightened. He couldn't leave them. Then he saw it, the faintest glimmer of light from beneath the church's shattered doorway, the sewer entrance, their only chance. Kovac glanced back, his teeth bared in a snarl. "Move, kid, or this is for nothing." The shadows surged forward, their whispers rising to a deafening chorus. Marco ran. He didn't look back. Behind him, gunfire erupted, then screams. The last thing he heard was Vukovic's voice, steady to the end. From Mostar, then silence. Marco reached the church, his lungs burning, his vision blurred with tears. He wrenched open the rusted grate and plunged into the darkness below. The sewer tunnel swallowed him whole. Above, the river's whispers faded, but they would never truly be gone. The golubari had taken their due, and Mostar's bridge would never be the same. The first rays of sunlight crept over the ruins of Mostar, painting the broken city in pale gold. The Neretva's waters, so dark and restless in the night, now shimmered with deceptive calm. Marko Dragic stood at the sewer's exit, his body trembling with exhaustion, his uniform caked in grime. He had crawled through the tunnels for hours, guided only by the faint glow of his flashlight and the distant echo of dripping water. Now, as he emerged into the open air, the silence was suffocating. No gunfire, no whispers, just the wind sighing through the skeletal remains of buildings. He turned back toward the river. The starry moat stood untouched, its ancient arches bathed in dawn's light. There was no sign of the figures, no trace of the horrors that had stalked the night. But he knew they were still there, waiting. Marco's hands clenched into fists. He was alone. The squad, Vukovic, Kovac, Markovic, all of them, gone, swallowed by the river or the things that called it home. Natum stiffened, boots scraping against stone. He spun, raising his empty rifle on instinct. A figure staggered from the ruins. Sergeant Petrovic. His face was gaunt, his eyes hollow, his uniform torn and stained. He swayed on his feet, his breath coming in ragged gasps. For a moment, the two men just stared at each other, the weight of the night pressing down on them. Then Petrovic spoke, his voice raw. "Anyone else?" Marco's throat tightened. He shook his head. Petrovic's face crumpled. He sank to his knees, his shoulders shaking. Marco didn't move, didn't speak. There were no words for this, no comfort to give. The sun rose higher, chasing away the last of the shadows. But the darkness lingered in their eyes. They had survived the night, but Mostar's ghosts would never let them forget. And somewhere, beneath the river's calm surface, the golubari waited for the next war, for the next souls, and the bridge's endless hunger. Marco turned away. The dawn had come, but the nightmare wasn't over. It would never be over. The command tent smelled of stale coffee and damp paper. Captain Vukovic sat at a rickety field desk, the dim glow of a kerosene lantern casting long shadows across the hastily drafted report in front of him. His pen hovered over the page, the ink drying as he hesitated. Missing in action, Petrov, Illich, Dragovich, Nikolic, Dragovich, Milosh. His jaw clenched. Lies, every word of it. But what else could he say? That his men had been taken by things that shouldn't exist? That the river itself had swallowed them whole? Command would have him discharged, or worse, committed. Across the tent, Private Dragovich sat on an overturned crate, watching him with hollow eyes. The boy had barely spoken since they'd dragged themselves from the sewers. His hands still shook whenever he touched his rifle. Vukovic exhaled sharply and signed the report. Enemy engagement. Heavy casualties. Bridge remains under our control. A half-truth. The bridge was theirs, for now. But he knew, deep in his bones, that it would never truly belong to the living. He folded the papers and sealed them in an envelope, then stood. "Burn the rest," he said quietly, nodding to Dragovich's journal where it lay on the cot. The boy had filled its pages with frantic scribbles, sketches of elongated figures, descriptions of the whispers, the nightmares. Dragovich didn't argue. He picked up the journal, his fingers tracing its worn cover. For a moment, Vukovic thought he might refuse. Then, wordlessly, the boy held it over the lantern's flame. The pages caught fire quickly, curling inward like dying hands. The ink blackened, the words vanishing into smoke. Vukovic watched until the last ember faded. Some truths were better left unspoken. Some horrors were better left buried. Outside, the Neretva flowed on, its dark waters whispering secrets no living man would ever understand. The report was filed. The journal was ash, and Mostar's ghosts remained. The orders came at dawn. Marko Dragovich stood at attention, his boots sinking slightly into the damp earth as Captain Vukovic read the reassignment notice aloud. The words barely registered. Redeployment, strategic withdrawal, new sector. But the meaning was clear. They were leaving. Mostar, the bridge, the river, the golubari. Kovac exhaled sharply through his nose, grinding his cigarette into the dirt with more force than necessary. About damn time. Marko didn't answer. His gaze drifted toward the Neretva, its dark waters glinting under the pale morning light. The bridge stood silent, its ancient stones unmarked by the horrors of the night, as if nothing had happened, as if it had all been a dream. Vukovic folded the orders, his face unreadable. Pack up. We move out in 30. The squad dispersed, their movements mechanical, their voices hushed. No one mentioned the missing. No one spoke of the whispers. They simply gathered their gear, their rifles, their shattered nerves, and prepared to leave. Marko rolled up his bedroll, his fingers brushing the charred edges of his ruined journal. The sketches were gone now, the hollow-eyed figures, the twisting shadows, but the memories remained. Petrov clapped him on the shoulder, his grip too tight. "Don't look back, kid." Marko nodded, but his eyes betrayed him. The armored transport rumbled to life, its engine a growl in the quiet morning. The squad loaded their gear, their weapons, their ghosts. One by one they climbed inside, their faces drawn, their eyes hollow. Marko was the last to board. He paused at the ramp, his breath fogging in the cold air. The bridge stood empty now, its arches stark against the dawn sky. Then, a scream, raw, ragged, unmistakably human. It echoed from the Neretva, rising above the river's whispers before being abruptly cut short. Marco's blood turned to ice. No one moved. No one spoke. Then the engine roared and the transport lurched forward. Marco didn't look back. None of them did. The bridge faded into the distance, its stones whispering secrets only the drowned would ever know. And the river flowed on, dark and hungry, waiting, always waiting. Years later, the old bridge was rebuilt. The stones, painstakingly reassembled, gleamed under the Mediterranean sun as if untouched by war. Tourists flocked to marvel at its arches, their cameras capturing the way the light danced on the Neretva's emerald waters. Children laughed as they leaped from the bridge's center, their splashes echoing like distant gunfire to those who still remembered. Marco Dragovich stood on the riverbank, his hands buried in the pockets of his civilian coat. He had no camera. He took no photos. The locals still whispered of the screams in the night. An old woman selling lavender by the bridge caught his eye and shook her head, as if she knew why he'd come back. "They say the river never gives back what it takes," she murmured in Bosnian, her voice like dry leaves. Marco said nothing. He didn't need to. The scars on his throat itched. At dusk, when the crowds thinned, he approached the bridge alone. The stones were warm beneath his palms, the mortar between them fresh, but already cracking in places. He paused at the center, where the Neretva's currents ran deepest. The water below was still, too still. Then, a whisper, not from the river, from the bridge itself. "Marco." His breath hitched. The voice was familiar, crudely sarcastic, but wrong, wet, hungry. He didn't look down. He knew what he'd see. The old woman was watching him from the bank, her fingers clutching her lavender stems like a rosary. Her lips moved in a silent prayer. Marco stepped back from the edge. The bridge stood. The river waited. And the dead, as always, remembered. He turned and walked away, his shadow stretching long behind him. The night deepened, and far below, something in the water laughed.